So what I do want to show you a little bit, I assume you all know what the World Bank is. We lend money, billions of it per year, to developing countries and middle-income countries, and including China. But in China, as you might imagine, it's an evolving place, and also our lending in China has evolved tremendously over the past few years. And if you look at what we did in early years, the highway, there you go, sorry. The highway stuff has essentially been phasing out in implementation. The inland water is slowing down a bit, but this is where you see a huge increase in new projects in the pipeline, in urban transport per se, and in rail transport. So we are definitely back in the infrastructure business. The doors are open for business. And not in a small way. We've got about a dozen railway projects in China. These are all not ours, but this is a map of the scale and scope of high-speed rail development in China, and we are financing bits and pieces of those. The railway business in China is very strong, and I think there's plenty of stories that you've all been reading in the world about the speed with which that has been happening. But the speed at which that's happening is only matched by the speed with which people are moving into urban centers. The urbanization today is about half of where it's going to be. Today we already have 80 cities of more than 1 million inhabitants. In about 10 years from now, we'll have 200 cities of more than 1 million people. And in the end, you'll see a complete reversal of the social structure in the country. And that, of course, is putting a huge amount of pressure on the urban systems of those cities. And that urbanization has called for increasing the mobility. And this is illustrating a little bit the speed with which urban rail-based networks, underground, overground, are being developed. So this was 10 years ago, and this is today what's operating. And this is what's going to operate in a while. So you see that there are dozens of cities, literally, with ambitions and plans to build metro systems the size of London or the size of Paris. And so too our clients in China. We are now supporting 2 urban railway projects, Kunming and Zhengzhou. And if you look at the relative size of these things, they are huge, with relatively small populations. But these populations stand to get doubled in the next 10 years. So they're really being entrepreneurial, being proactive, to grab a hold of the alignments that they've got today to prepare the ground for the development into the future. And so the project that I'm most directly involved in, I just came from there 10 days ago, is the Kunming project. The city is an interesting place, if I can find it again here, south of China, with strong historical links to Vietnam. There's still a French colonial railway through the city that goes to Hanoi. So an interesting place, not yet the large boulevards of the other places, still a very livable place. And so it's a very welcome to us proactive stance to invest heavily in public transport infrastructure. And they are investing quite heavily. There's about 5 lines of the 6th optional line that are on the books, that have been approved to invest in. And this is line 1 and this is line 2. Line 1 and half of line 2 are being combined into the first construction, and we are financing bits of this line 3. And there's 4, 5, and 6 crossing around there. So I won't spend too much time on the technicalities of these projects. That's not the point of what I'm trying to get across today. What I'm trying to show you is the way in which these things are evolving in the city and the way in which these things are being managed. One aspect of being managed is speed. They're going very, very quickly. And these are non-trivial. They're a 20-kilometer size link with 17 stations. And this particular link does the east-west corridor. And this particular link is expecting about 200,000 trips in a couple of years from starting. And the interesting thing is, too, talk about proactive, about almost half of the passengers will come from the outer areas, here and here, where to date there is very little development. Missing one. Where is it? Oh, it'll come. I'll show you. So in that proactive context and things moving fast, we decided that given all the construction that's been going on in China in the past few years, that our biggest worry was not per se that there was a technical issue that we need to supervise specifically the engineering or be very critical about the engineering or the design. What we felt was that the key challenges that we could provide some insight and some international perspective on was the integration aspect, to encourage the compact city theme around the development, and to understand with them together the financial viability and sustainability of the whole project. The biggest worry we had initially was looking at typical Chinese cities. The bus company and the rail company were under very different departments. And they weren't talking to each other very much. The railway company is established, you get the project, you get the money, you build the railway. And the bus company is just driving buses. So we spent a lot of time to discuss with them that there was a huge opportunity for integrating the networks and a huge need for integrating the networks, and to be sure that the two networks didn't start to compete with each other, but that they were properly integrated. The vice mayor has taken that to heart and independently has come to his own conclusions that to cross over these departmental historical divides, he himself has taken on the task of integrating these departments functionally and content-wise. So he set up an integration working group, including the bus people, the rail people, and the land use planning departments. So this is the core team now that has to address the potential gap between these two modalities and departments and systems. The second aspect of making this integration work is, of course, the physical design, the architecture, the details of how individual passengers actually get from somewhere to somewhere. And typically, again, the railway company gets a design institute to make the designs, and the designs get made, the design gets built for the railway, and the railway stops at the gate. And so the city was proactive enough to build an integration plan. And the integration plan included the land space allocations around the stations, at the back of the stations, across the stations, to enable bus bays to be built, to be able to walkways to be integrated, to enable waiting areas to be included in the final detailed design of the whole thing, and for these things also to be funded through the relevant departments, and for the land required for that to be authorized by the relevant departments already at this stage. And this is the one thing that we try to emphasize to them ever since we got involved in this, is that it's crucially important for the benefits to accrue to start this discussion at the very earliest possible stage, so that things don't get locked out, things get locked in the positive sense, when you allocate space for these things at an early stage of your design and architecture above ground as well. So that is, I think, one of the major achievements of Kunming City leadership, that they have taken these themes to heart and not just gone ahead and built stuff. They are gone ahead and decided to develop an integrated city context for this. And we did some modeling for them and with them, and just to show them that the potential negative impact of not doing all these things could be quite big. And these are sort of sketch models, so don't look at the actual values, but look at the relative proportions of the impact. That if stations are not connected, then people will not transfer as easily as they might. They might stick to sitting in the bus. And they'll certainly stick to sitting in the bus if the bus is actually competing with the railway alignment. And if there's no pricing advantage or incentive to actually change from one mode to the other in an integrated manner, then the total impact could be 25–30% of the revenue. So that is one of the key integration aspects, one of the key issues that we wanted to address. And I think everybody understands that China doesn't really need financing from external parties to do this, but they do appreciate this type of dialogue. And we found them very receptive to this type of discussion. And at the same time, they were very proactive themselves in coming up with the notion how to themselves organize the capture of land value. As I said before, the development is very proactive. You look at a satellite picture of the eastern part of this, there's not much there at this stage. But there's a lot of plans to do a lot there into the future. And these plans are already being proposed, and private developers are throwing their notions and ideas at the leadership already. So part of the justification of the government investment is that precisely the private sector will come in at various parts and contribute to the development. And there's a specific mechanism that has been developed by the city that sort of looks like the Hong Kong model to the extent that I understand that. But it sort of says, look, the city allocates land owned by the city to the railway company. So now the railway company owns or has access to this value of this land. And then this railway company does a primary development, what they call the primary development phase is the responsibility of the railway company. So they make it ready for development and make ready for bidding. And then the private sector receives all these concepts and qualifies them as to acceptability. And then the land is actually sold to the highest bidder. And then that developer gets to develop its concept. And this railway company sort of is in the loop at that process to try to influence the concept in the sense that it integrates optimally with the railways and the railway stations and the underground infrastructure that's there. And then at auction, the railway company gets the money, the proceeds from the auction, and can put it into its balance sheet to pay back some of the loan that they've taken from us and from the private sector to build the thing. So here you have part of the loop back. There the value is created through the investment by the city, through the company, and the company recaptures back some of that value to pay back some of the debt that's associated with those transactions. And to my great happiness, this is not what they intend to do. I think that's Shanghai. They're very conscious of the fact that that sea of skyscrapers could be detrimental to your health. And they do understand, as we all do in our discussions here today, that there is some value to having dense development around the stations, around your alignment, so that the whole thing functions better. But they've also understood that density everywhere is also not the thing that you can manage very well. So what they've done is made express policy already to create satellite districts and towns. And they've already made plans to create suburban rail links from the edges of town to those sub-centers. So they've got a fairly integrated, layered approach to achieving a balanced set of growth centers linked with good speed rail, not high speed rail, but proper rail, from the suburban areas out to the satellite towns, and from the suburban areas inward into the city center. And this is an express policy that they're pursuing, and the railway plans have already been approved, and construction will start next year, just to name speed. So this is no nonsense, this is the way we're doing it. And I'm delighted that to have discovered precisely in my last mission how far they went along already, very quietly even, in proceeding in this manner. At the same time, in other cities, we are developing, therefore, also different ways of looking at these developments. It's not just about the travel time. New indicators will need to be developed to understand properly the value of these investments. And one of the indicators is that we've been experimenting with is the number of jobs that you can get around your developments. And so we've done some modeling in Wuhan for a very different type of urban investment, but nevertheless the same theory holds that if you can provide accessibility to urban centers through your public transport, you can start to measure the number of jobs that are available within 15, 20, 30 minutes from the residential areas or from those spots that are the centers of your town. So as we get these proposals from cities, and as we get proposals from governments to appraise these projects as the World Bank, we no longer can we say, oh, what's a travel time reduction? The travel time reduction is a moot point if there's no jobs there to have after you get there. So it's also got to do with, does the modality you pick fit the purpose that it's supposed to function with? And does the density of those functions equal the density of the capacity that you put in there? So these things have to start to meet each other, otherwise the cost benefits won't work. The economic cost benefits won't work. So between integration and transit-oriented development, in this case even in 3 layers, we come to the third aspect of what does it mean financially. And I think the previous speaker has demonstrated already that the land value capture, whatever specific mechanism you can develop in the context of the city at hand, is a huge part. And some 40–50% of the equity is generated through these types of transactions. And the rest is to come, of course, from regular operations and regular government borrowing to meet the economic purposes and the economic goals of the city. So at the same time, the railway company is not excused from doing its homework and to generate as much as possible ancillary revenue. And again, in true Chinese style, you don't think small, you think big, and they have actually 14 different sources of ancillary revenues, not just advertisement, the whole gamut of park and ride, petrol stations around the corridors. So you actually capture some of the externality values of competing modes, if you will. Electric charging vehicles, there is even advertising, station entrance, park and ride, naming rights, and smart card operations. I think they've fairly much covered anything anybody could think of that they could generate ancillary revenues with. So this is not about the technology, it's not about the number of cars or this, that, the other. This is about how they have themselves very consciously conceived of their integration, how they've themselves understood the barriers to integration that they grew up with and inherited through the way these cities simply are structured. They themselves have understood that they need to make these different modalities, road, bus, and rail, come under the same authority of the single mayor, vice mayor, and this single vice mayor has gone one step further and taken personal charge themselves and sit at my table and driving this thing home. And they have themselves well understood the value of the integrated approach in terms also of transit-oriented design, and have taken that to a high degree, with land being transferred to the company and the land value capture being allocated to the company itself. And as I said, the franchises are certainly a huge part of the equation, but obviously I think the clear closing loop of the whole thing is the land value capture, but it has its own internal logic within the legal context of the city itself. And the designs are being very actively looked at as we talk. So thank you for this opportunity. It's a rare occasion that we see everything coming together.
I would be interested, and I know I sounded critical of the World Bank with my initial remarks, but actually I was there because I have great esteem for the World Bank and for the expertise that is in this institution. Now, what would you say is the main thing you are bringing to this project, you as World Bank? Is it the urban development know-how? Is it the financing? Is it a mix of things? Is it being able to advise them the whole process? What would you say are the main benefits of having the World Bank involved?
I think that the main thing, we've been in dialogue with them quite intensely from the very first meetings. There's been this notion of making sure the integration is effectively achieved, and they themselves say, yes, we had to take some time to cross the barriers between bus and rail and land value and land planning, and they had to learn each other's language, literally, they said. And so it's been a process that they themselves had to go through, and to the extent that we've been helpful in shaping a dialogue or making the dialogue possible, or acting as sort of conduits for putting the right words on the screen so that they can look at them and make them more objective rather than threatening. Maybe that's what we do, and maybe that's why we do it, because we see the value of doing so, and we see the potential value loss of not doing so. And these are huge investments. I mean, this is not trivial dollars. These are, you know what these things cost, even in China. These are big numbers. Yeah. So the risk to the city of getting it wrong is quite big, particularly given the scale and scope of the size of the investment that they're doing. So I think that's probably the primary driver of our engagement.
Great. Well, thank you very much,
Okay.
Rein Westra.